All right, folks, welcome to the Neighborhood Podcast. This is our inaugural podcast. I'm doing this as a bit of a project for a class that I'm taking for my doctoral studies called Digital Ministry in the 21st Century. Ever since I've been here as the pastor of Guilford Park Presbyterian Church, I've had an itch to do a podcast kind of like this, and our very own Kay Owen has graciously agreed to be my first guest. And the topic of our time today is going to be on the topic of how we can be more welcoming to our neurodivergent neighbors, specifically neurodivergent children, of which Kay has several. So she has very graciously agreed to join us to talk a little bit about that. So Kay, we'll go ahead and hand it out to you first. This was not on our prompting before, but can you tell us real quickly, how long have you and your family been members here at Guilford Park? And can you tell us briefly what it was that got you here and why this is an important part of your life?
I actually have a really great story for that. So I have been a member of Guilford Park for 20 years.
Okay.
And I can pinpoint that because my son just turned 23. And we came because it was close to where we live. And we stayed because the very first service that we came and visited at Guilford Park, my 3-year-old son, who put the H in ADD, the capital H in ADHD, he went up for children's message. Very first time I had visited this church, I was sitting, maybe midway, and he went up for children's message, and they had all the kids sitting, and it was lovely. And then when they released the kids to come back to seats, my son went up to the microphone at the pulpit. Mom! Hi, Mom, I love you.
Your kid, really.
That's really happened. And so, and then, I was like, oh my gosh, everybody was very affirmative of him. Nobody, and he could not sit still ever, still to this day. He eats standing up. And everybody was very positive and very welcoming. Nobody gave me, oh my gosh, control your kid. So that was like, I may have found my space. Because, when you have a kid that's spicy, there and always on, you get a lot of dirty looks.
Yeah. And
this church didn't give me dirty looks for my son's behavior, so I stayed.
So is that when David Sutton was?
Yes.
It was the pastor.
Yes.
Trying to think back there. Good.
Yes.
Well, can you start by sharing a little about your child or your children and what it means for you to be a parent of neurospicy kids?
Neurospicy kids. So I have several neurospicy kids. But all of them, except for one, are adults now. So I'll kind of gear more towards my youngest, Poppy, who's 8. She has autism. She has apraxia, which is a neurological disorder. She has hyperacusis, which is sensitivity to sounds. She's auditory processing disorder, sensory processing disorder. So she hits a lot of the spicy marks on that one. And parenting all of those kids have been extremely different. I think it's easier now with my youngest because people are more understanding and more accepting.
You just think it's in the collective conversation more than it used to be when you're
yes.
older kids were growing up.
Yeah, but you need a lot of patience, a lot of understanding when dealing with kids that are not neurotypical. And you just need to give them all a safe space. A safe space to be and to be loved, to be themselves, to have their stems or their, spiciness. And I think here at our church we have a lot of understanding of that social battery, that it needs to be recharged sometimes, that you need to let them do their thing. And
so how old is Poppy now?
Poppy's 8.
And how young was she when y'all came to a realization that she was neurodivergent?
So we
what did
knew,
that conversation look like?
Yeah, we knew pretty early on. We hit early intervention at 18 months, so she was a year and a half.
And what were the signs or the cues?
So Poppy didn't speak until start speaking until she was 3. She only spoke in vowel sounds.
Okay.
So we actually did not know that she was autistic until we went for our diagnosis for her apraxia. Apraxia is a neurological disorder. And the easiest way to explain it is when someone has a stroke and they understand everything that's coming in, but they can't get it to come out. They can't, so they might speak garbled, or their body function. She has global apraxia, so sometimes it's hard for her to do body movements or things like getting dressed. She's 8. She just learned how to do that. So your brain doesn't connect with your body all the time. So she couldn't speak, and that was our biggest red flag, was that she wasn't speaking. The fact that she ran around with headless dolls all the time in her hand, we didn't realize that was autism, because girls present differently than boys do with autism. So, yeah.
So what have been some of the most significant challenges that you've had as a parent on this journey?
I think the biggest challenge for us is just having people understand. So it's a lonely road. When you have a child that's not neurotypical, it is extremely lonely as a parent because everybody doesn't understand. You get a lot of quirky looks or muttering, or, that child needs a spanking, things. You do get comments like that a lot. So those are the biggest challenges, is not necessarily dealing with your child, but dealing with other people, understanding your child. So that's really hard.
Can you share what's a moment that you have been I'm sure there are many, but what's a moment that you've been particularly proud of Poppy? Just something that just lights up your soul and just...
Yeah.
What's a parent moment like that?
I think, especially here in the church, acolyting. That was huge. And this is a new accomplishment that we've had recently. She did the training, and our youth educator was huge in explaining everything that would be happening. So for an autistic kid, having the information is very important for them. So, exactly what you're going to do in training, exactly what you're going to do if you acolyte, everything down to the pastor's going to look at you and nod and say, now's the time to pour the water, or now's the time to do whatever it is you're supposed to do. For a typical kid, you can run through those things and you're done. For an autistic kid, they're going to want to know every little detail. Like, if I do spill the water, what am I going to do? The towel's here. This is what we're going to do. If the candle goes out, what's going to happen? So, knowing all the information for an autistic kid is huge, and knowing all the scenarios that what could happen or what's going to happen. So she did it. And she was able to go up and she shared duties with her cousin Tony, who happens to also be autistic. And so they split up the duties, which is how she needs to function. She needs to know that she doesn't have to do everything. And that's a great way that we've been inclusive here at the church, is that it's, yes, the job has 5 parts. You don't have to do all 5. Let's do 2. And let's do, and like this Sunday, she wanted to do the offering. It's not an acolyte's job, but, our ushers were like, yes, come do the offering with me. So
I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah, her and Tony both did the offering, and Good. It wasn't planned, and they wanted to do it, and they did it at Children's Sunday, and the ushers were like, yes, please.
Another moment that I really enjoyed this Sunday was when Tony was up during the anthem.
Yes.
And I noticed that you came and got him, but not immediately. Like he was up there for a minute or two, just because I think he was really curious. Maybe he liked the music.
He loves the music.
As far as I can tell, nobody panicked or oh no.
I kind of went up to the front, so he knew he had somebody to come to when it was time to come back. But yeah, we just let him.
As a pastor, I mean, we Presbyterians love to do things decently and in order, and there's a certain comfort to be found in a certain predictability of worship. I like to hold that in one hand. And also, unscripted moments like that can be really beautiful moments.
Yeah.
Where the Holy Spirit can break through if we get out of the way,
And I love that, he's comfortable in our church running up and down during the service. If music is going, he wants to move. He's got, a lot of times you'll see him in the back just spinning.
Yeah,
And I love that.
I caught that on
love it.
video a few weeks ago,
I
and
know,
I didn't
and I
realize
love it.
I didn't realize it until after. I think I was taking a brief video of the final hymn from my perspective from the pulpit, and I uploaded it to Instagram or whatever. And it wasn't until later that I realized, oh, that's
He's
Tony
in the back just spinning, and he does that every
spinning.
single song.
And I just love that. What are, do you think, some common misconceptions about neurodivergency in general and neurodivergent children?
Misconceptions. So I've heard, especially with my child, because my child looks like a neurotypical child, so a lot of her stuff is neurological. And I've heard they do this just to get attention, or they do this to get services. So that's a really tough thing. A lot of different characteristics of that, the communication, it's so hard, just expressing yourself. So that's a huge, so people don't understand. You and I can understand social cues very easily. But someone who's autistic takes things very literally. Like my kid struggles a lot with jokes. We work on that in therapy. Why is a joke funny? I don't understand.
Yeah. Another misconception that I think has been prevalent, especially since COVID-19 and the vaccines, is I know there have been a lot of misinformation out there about vaccines causing autism. I'm sure you've heard.
It's genetic.
I'm sure you've heard that before, and I just all of as a parent of two small children who we chose to get them vaccinated, we did our research. We talked to all sorts of pediatricians, and there is no evidence.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's a button subject for a lot of parents on both sides.
Sure.
Parents who have kids on the spectrum and parents who don't. That vaccines cause it, but the reality is it's really a genetic.
Yeah.
And it's a masculine thing. It typically comes down on the dad's side of the family.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and but it can come from both sides.
Sure.
But it is a genetic component, and there's a lot of comorbidities there between ADD and autism, and there's a lot of them that just kind of they mingle, and they all have very common threads. My son, who's ADHD, mimics a lot of things that are autism. And all the things that we know about autism are predominantly male traits. So females present way differently than males, which is why I have a 18-year-old who was diagnosed 2 years ago. We didn't know until we had Poppy. We didn't know she was autistic. So,
what did that? Just out of curiosity, what did that process of diagnosis look like?
Oh, it's hard. So we waited for almost 2 years to get in to see somebody who would even diagnose her. So the wait list in our area is really, really hard to get in to get that diagnosis, and we didn't even know. We didn't have to have that diagnosis. She wanted it, and because we said we don't care. It's, and we went to her doctors that she had, and they said, oh yeah, she's autistic. We didn't question it. We knew, and I didn't know it. She didn't know it. But because of her sister, we were like, you might be on that spectrum, and of course she was. Both of her, doctors said, oh yeah, she's definitely on that spectrum. And then when we had her tested, he said, you are definitely on the spectrum. So, but it was hard to get in to see somebody. It was a lot easier for Poppy because she was young when she got diagnosed at 2.5 years old.
Uh-huh.
It was much easier to get her diagnosis because, you just go in and see a developmental pediatrician and, done.
So typically the older you are when you get diagnosed, maybe there's some more obstacles there.
There's more obstacles to get diagnosed.
That checks out. As you know, my wife Tricia is a child therapist, and she has, whenever she has parents she works primarily with children. I think 25 is usually the oldest that she sees, and she's working with she always sees her work with children as a partnership with the parents, and I know she works with a lot of parents who are curious about if their children are on the spectrum, and she always encourages them get on the wait list now, because what you just said has checked out with what Tricia has said, is there's not a lot of there's just not enough places,
right, especially for older. Like younger it's a lot easier, but for the older you are, the older children, it is harder today even than it was 15 years ago, because we had our son tested and he was not autistic. But, again, that ADD and the autism kind of have a lot of the same comorbidities with each other.
So let's pivot here to the role of the church, because I'm really grateful that you shared that one of the things that drew your family here in the first place was that kind of unscripted encounter with your son at the pulpit, and nobody freaked out. Y'all weren't chased out with pitchforks and
they let us come back.
And that, you said that was what, 20 years ago. 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So as a church community, obviously we're doing some things right. But how can we better support families with neurodivergent children? So what are some specific accommodations that you have seen work well in this church and other churches? I know that we've implemented some things in the past 12 months or so. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I think the biggest thing is going to be education. I mean, let's do some lunch and learns and things like that. Education is, the more you know, the farther goes across, for support. So offering inclusive activities. And I'm going to give a little shout out to our Buddy and Me group, BAM group, because last year with our Buddy and Me group, the majority of the events were 50% neurospicy kids.
Really?
Yes. Part of that is because a lot of Poppy's friends, we would invite kiddos that, and they happen to have cerebral palsy, autism, things like that. But yeah, about 50% of our Buddy and Me group that comes to activities were neurospicy kids. So the normal kids were not, the neurotypical kids were not, the only ones there. We had a lot of, so that was, inclusive activities is huge. Advocate for the individual, spend time with other kids, obviously the siblings of the kids that are neurodivergent, they do have a harder time too, but do things that involve the entire family. And that's huge. And I think when you have large functions, activities in the church, be mindful, because as a parent of a child who is on the spectrum, I pick my activities by what's going to happen at that event. So if it's going to be all chaotic, I'm not going. If it's going to be too crazy, I'm not going to do it, because I know I'm setting my kid up for failure. If I know that there's going to be a quiet space that we can step off to, or, if there's availability for less loud activities, that's what I'm gearing towards. Our trunk or treat yesterday, my kid did not trunk or treat. She went to one car. She didn't go to any of the cars. She went to one car. She wanted to do the haunted with the organ playing with Dr. Bill. She wanted to come inside. She didn't want to be outside and all of that. So her dad took her, and they stayed inside the building almost the entire time. And that's okay. And that's okay. If that's what so I like events where we can kind of pick and choose. And I think that's all part of, being okay with all the kids aren't going to do all, you can't make them perform. You can't make them. And we all like to see our kids do, like choir this year. My kid hasn't done choir at all this year. Cause she can sing, but she can't memorize the songs. And so she has a hard time singing with other kids. So if you look back at the video, she's mouthing, but she's not singing in last year's choir. But, and she said, I just don't want to go up there. That's okay too. So we pick and choose our activities by, if it's a large group function, is there things that are going to be accommodating to her? You know, and obviously you have to have functions that are going to accommodate everybody, but if there's a takeout part or something that will accommodate her a little better, we're more likely to do it.
Well, another thing that I'm learning as one who is trying to lead the church to be more inclusive of folks who are neurodivergent is, if you are listening to this podcast or watching and you're thinking, well, how can I be more neighborly towards our neurodivergent kids? My personal advice to myself, and maybe this helps, is don't take it personally.
Right.
Like, if you want to hug a child and Poppy or whoever is not in a place where they want that, and establish that boundary, whether they're neurodivergent or not, for the record.
Yes.
But especially if they're not neurodivergent, don't take it personally.
Right.
99.9% of the time, it has nothing to do with you.
Oh yeah, and and I have a really good example of that is we have passing the peace every Sunday.
Oh, I bet that's a tough
every
time
Sunday. And we kind of sit
kids
towards the back, but my kid shuts down. She cannot stand passing the peace. She doesn't like for people to talk to her. She doesn't like for people to touch her. She because it's too much. It's sensory overload for her. So at passing the peace, she does like this, and she tucks in, and she doesn't, and it used to be that people, I mean, everybody wants to say hi to a cute kid and how are you and peace be with you, and they want to be friendly, but now the people that surround us are protectors of Poppy. Like when passing a piece happens, she doesn't have to huddle down into me like that. She knows that she can sit. Sometimes she'll put her headphones on, sometimes she'll just put her head down, and they'll say, they don't try to touch her. They'll just flash her little peace sign and say, peace, Poppy, and move on. Like, people don't come at her anymore. So and that's huge. If people learn your kid, and they know, because my nephew's the opposite. He wants to say hi to everybody. He wants to run around, and that's his moment to go jump up and talk to all people. But Poppy kind of cocoons and turns into a little shell during that moment.
I love that.
So,
I absolutely love that the people around you have come to that awareness of who Poppy is, and how she can feel. You opened up our conversation about safe spaces, and that can be a safe space for her, and this is also a helpful reminder for us, again, whether or not the person you're sitting next to is neurodivergent, is whenever you're engaging things like passing of the peace, which can be tough for neurodivergent folks, introverts, folks who are survivors of physical trauma or other forms of trauma, is consent is important. It never hurts to say, can I give you a hug?
And adults,
and if the answer is yes, great. If the answer is no, again, don't take it.
And here's something, as adults, we tend to not allow kids that same space that we allow adults.
Interesting.
Don't you think? Like, we'll say, oh, go hug grandma.
Yeah.
Or go give so-and-so a high. If the kid's not comfortable, don't make them do it. We wouldn't make an adult do it. Why would we make the kid, creating safe spaces? You're 100% right.
Yeah. And that is also an area of growth for me as a parent too, with my own children.
Yeah.
Because Trisha and I are teaching them that they have autonomy over their own bodies, and that if they're ever in a place where they don't feel comfortable, that they can say no. And even for us parents, like, there are times I really want to snuggle my kids, and sometimes they really want it. They really want to. Great. Sometimes they don't, and it's my responsibility as the parent to accept that
the boundary.
Not make it be about me.
Yeah.
But that's tough to do sometimes.
Is.
To me, that doesn't always come naturally, which is why I think the church can be a really great place for us to practice that together.
Yes.
So that we realize that this is the work that we are doing together. Again, I want to frame this theologically, because this is a church podcast.
Right.
We do this because Jesus was very intentional about opening space for people of all kinds.
Yes. We accept everyone.
So can you, I'm going a little bit off script here, but
fine.
Can you share a little bit about, being a parent of a neurodivergent kid, neurodivergent children, how has that impacted your faith formation, or what role does your faith play in your journey to be the best parent that you can be of your children, to be the best spouse you can be, best friends, insert relationship here.
Yeah. I mean, I think, in the church, Jesus wants us to be like Jesus, do the way you want to be done too, right? So, modeling that behavior. So, when somebody's shushing a kid in the church and it makes me mad, and I think I had a conversation with you about this, that somebody was shushing one of the kids, and I don't like that at all. The first couple times it happened, I was very angry, and I was, ready to mama bear it, and, and by the third or fourth time, I'm like, okay, I need to show this person grace. So kind of, sometimes you have to show grace to people that don't understand. And I'm modeling that behavior for my kid. So, we all want to do better and be better. And that's, sometimes we're all going to make mistakes, but,
Jesus doesn't ask us to bat 1,000.
That's true.
And we can still hold ourselves accountable to trying to do better, and to be better. And
with my kids, I always say, you do somebody the way you want them to do you. So if I want to have grace, if I want somebody to have grace with me, I've got to have grace with everybody else too. So everybody's going to make mistakes, and we all got to learn.
And the other point of growth that I think churches of all kinds have is, I think that it's important for us to have the conversation of what's the difference between acceptance and celebration, right? It's one thing to just say, you know what, we're going to put up with this behavior because, we have to, and we're inclusive, and saying, hey, this is a beloved child of God.
Right.
This child is not a mistake. God did not make it. This child is not broken, or, this is the way that God, I think it was Greta Thunberg, the climate activist, the young climate activist, who I remember once she spoke of her autism as her superpower, right? She kind of said, no, this is part of what makes me who I am, and it brings these certain gifts that I have to this passionate work that I'm passionate about. So, how can we as a church move just not putting up with neurodivergent kids?
Right.
That's
but
a
celebrating
problem.
them.
Yeah. Celebrating. I mean, how can we... You mentioned education is one of the ways.
Yeah.
Anything else you would add to that list of ways that we can kind of get to a place of celebrating?
Yeah, I mean,
diversity of God's people.
Supporting the parents, the parents and the families is huge. But because if you lift up the parents, you're going to help them to lift up their kid, right? If you put down the parents, they're going to be embarrassed, or they're going to feel a certain kind of way, and they're not going to want to bring their kids around. I'm not going to say who it was, but I have a family here at our church who didn't come to church for many, many years because they were worried about their child's behavior in church.
Yeah.
So, and that's a real thing. If you get the stares, or you get the mumbling, or you get, and not just in church, but anywhere in the world, you're going to, somebody's going to get that. Mm-hmm. And it happens more frequently when you have a kid that's neurodivergent.
Sure.
You get the comments and the stares and the muttering, and and then as a parent, you feel bad, and you don't want to look down on your child. You want to celebrate your child. They're an amazing human being, and you want everybody else to see that amazing human being. But it's really hard when you have, people that are giving them stares or muttering, or,
I've found it quite remarkable how the rest of the world outside of the church is becoming more inclusive. I mean, for example, I take our two girls, Hazel, Grace, and Winnie, to the Children's Museum a lot, and they have sunglasses there, and they have headphones and even I don't know if they're currently doing this, but they had like a certain day of the week or certain hours that are for kids that tend to
sensory friendly.
There you go. Yep. Thank you. Sensory friendly. Mm-hmm. And so whether that's a school or a museum or anywhere else, if the church is the only place that these young families go to that doesn't take this seriously,
right?
I kind of share. What
Well,
message is that sending about God?
yeah.
What subliminal messaging does that? You hear what I'm saying? Like,
Oh, yeah.
if the church is not a part of this conversation,
Right.
that does a lot of damage that I don't think anybody intentionally wants to do.
Right.
But I think
And there
it's
are
really
so many things that
important
we can do. You know, like in our sanctuary, it's lit very well. It's not overpowering,
Mm-hmm.
but lighting, smells, sounds. I would love to see in our bulletin. I had talked to Kim about this recently. Little icons that tell, because our kids don't read social cues. Like you and I, when everybody stands up and we're doing passing the peace, and then we know when you stand up and go to the pulpit, everybody's going to kind of sit down and quiet down. Well, an autistic individual is not going to get that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't read social cues the way you and I do. But if we had in our bulletin a little thing that says, you know, it's like an icon of an ear or a speaker or something that said this is a loud part in the service, just a little icon. Or if we had, a finger, then we know it's going to get quiet during that. But that's just my kid doesn't read very well yet. But my nephew, who's also the same age, autistic, reads like 4 years ahead of himself. He reads that bulletin every Sunday. He would see, and they sit side by side. And so the two of them play off each other, and he tells Poppy when something's coming. She'll tell him when something's coming. But yeah, something simple like that in our bulletin would be huge for someone who's on the spectrum to know it's going to get loud, it's going to get quiet, because they don't read the social cues that you and I do.
No, and for those I know I'm guilty of this because I'm just as much a product of the church as most of the other people here. We get into rhythms and patterns, and we just assume that everybody else picks up on them.
Right.
And I don't think that's a good assumption for us to make, especially for neurodivergent kids.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody
yeah.
that walks into the door of this church, whether they're neurodivergent or not, who has never experienced Presbyterian form of worship or whatever, like, I think it's an act of hospitality, not just for our neurodivergent neighbors,
right,
but for everybody,
right,
to not assume that they know what those cues are. And
right.
I don't think, it's probably unreasonable for us to mitigate 100% of that uncertainty, but there are things that we can do to lessen that burden, to make the new visitor or the neurodivergent kid and their families at least know that we as a church, like, we acknowledge that diversity.
Oh yeah.
And we see it not as something to be ashamed of or to try to put up with, but something to celebrate and to explore, because as you said, that's what Jesus would do.
Oh, yeah.
And Jesus doesn't call us to do the easy thing. Jesus calls us to do the right thing. But all the things that you're talking about, they don't cost a lot of money.
No, they're all easy things. Sensory bins, headphones, they're all super, super easy things. And, for you and I to sit through an hour-long church service, it's not difficult. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's depending on who's preaching, but your services are not difficult.
I know. I'm the pastor, and sometimes it's difficult for me too. So
but an hour-long service for most people is not. It's not a hard hour. It's you're listening and you're in tune. But for a kid on the spectrum, that is socially that is just emotionally draining. There's so many different things and so many different changes in that hour time, and then the mental power it takes, especially if you don't understand those social cues. Get up, sit down, be quiet, be loud, walk around, stay in your seat. And our church does a really good job of recognizing that, our staff, I should say, because like even in children's message yesterday, Poppy was having a really hard time in service yesterday, and she put the headphones on, and when she went up for children's message, one of her stems is skin picking. She
when you say stim, tell me about that word. STIMM.
It's a stimulating. It's something that autistic individuals do to self-regulate themselves.
Gotcha.
So there are positive stems and there are negative stems. So a positive stem might be my nephew who likes to spin during the music. He's not hurting himself. He's not hurting anybody else. A negative stem would be like Poppy picking at her skin. She picks sores because she's got so much anxiety and she's sensory overload, so she has to pick. But in our children's message yesterday, our Kim was giving her children's message, and she noticed that Poppy was, picking because she was anxious and nervous, and she had the headphones on and everything. And she just gently, didn't draw attention of it, but she just gently put her hand. Now, nobody else in the congregation probably recognized what she was doing. As mama of an autistic child, I immediately recognized that she's putting her hand on her to say, I see what you're doing. It's okay. Come, and she just held her hand on Poppy's hand for just a moment. Mm-hmm. Poppy immediately stopped. That was all she needed, was just that physical, it's okay. Mm-hmm. And then she moved on, never drew attention to it, never said a word, nothing. But, the adults that, if you get to know an autistic child, you know what their likes are, you know what their dislikes are, and you start to pick up on those nonverbal cues that those kids are putting out. Because an autistic kid is not going to tell you, I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah, they don't
There's
have that
too much.
capacity.
I can't.
Yeah.
And some kids are more vocal than others.
And some non-neurodivergent folks also don't have that ability to say, I'm feeling this way
if
now.
If you pick up on the visuals of that person, you can kind of see, like I know instantly if my kid or my nephew is getting overstimulated because I can see by their body language. They're not going to vocalize, that they're having a hard time.
We have another neurodivergent child in the congregation who I know always has a clothes hanger that he mm-hmm. brings every single Sunday. Mm-hmm. Would that also be considered a STEM? Is that's also self-regulating behavior?
Yeah, I would say that would be a self-regulating. Yeah, because my kid used to walk around with headless dolls all the time. Yeah. She always, and to this day, she still has something tiny in her hand a lot of times. Yeah.
And I think that even those of us who would not consider themselves neurodivergent, I think could still relate to that because we all emotionally regulate ourselves in different ways.
Yep.
Whether we're neurodivergent or not. So I think we can empathize with that. I know that when I am particularly anxious, I have things that I do that calm myself and self-regulate. Whether that's doing a guided meditation mm-hmm.
Or
going into the sanctuary and screaming, which I have done, and I guarantee you I'm not the only pastor
You're probably
that's
not
done
the only one who's done that.
Or going for a swim at the or whatever.
So my 18-year-old knits.
She about Emily?
Emily, she'll come in the sanctuary. Mm-hmm. She knits, and actually I had a couple people the last time she was here and she was knitting in church, and I had a couple adults came up to me and said, I never thought to do that. And she's been doing it for years. Mm-hmm. I never thought to bring knitting, and she gets anxiety when she's around a lot of people mm-hmm. and a lot of stuff. And so that's a common thing for her. And she was, years ago, she was like, is it okay? I'm like, yeah, bring it. But I had several adults ask me, I never thought, you think that's okay? I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Does it make you feel better? Do it.
It's interesting. My preaching professor in seminary, Anna Carter Florence, used to knit while she was listening to our sermons, listening to her preach, and I was ignorant enough that at first I thought it was rather rude.
Yeah.
Until I listened to her and got to know her better, and actually that was one of the ways that she focused and listened even more intently on our sermons. So I think part of this whole conversation is acknowledging that people experience things differently, and that the Church of Jesus Christ should be a place where we acknowledge those differences, seek the common humanity in one another, and also do a better job of listening to our young families. And listening to their experience. And I loved how you mentioned previously that one of the best ways we can lift up our neurodivergent children is by lifting up their parents.
Because it's lonely.
Because you've used that word a couple times. Well,
because you don't interact well with the parents of all neurotypical children. Your kid doesn't get invited to the birthday parties because they're different or weird. Your kid doesn't get invited on play dates because they're more difficult, or sometimes you can't leave your kid. What if they have a meltdown? What if there's so many things in your head that you have to plan for to allow your kid to do an activity or to allow your kid to go be with somebody. My daughter had a best friend from kindergarten who recently moved to the Asheville area, and we used to call her the Poppy Whisperer. And I just did an IEP meeting at our school, and I said, well, the Poppy Whisperer is gone, so you guys have now got to figure it out yourselves. But her mom went as far as when she would have birthday parties, She knows my kid doesn't like for her food to touch. So she would always have a divided plate for Poppy. She knew that, if I'm bringing multiple fruit, I'm not doing a fruit salad. Everything's going to be separated.
Yeah.
Because my kid won't touch it. She knows my kid has to have a separate utensil.
Yeah.
For every food item. So learning about these kids and knowing what their little quirks are, their differences are important, because as a parent, you have a hard time connecting with the normal parents. And then what happens is you meet a parent who has a spicy kid, and then the two of you are like, oh my gosh, my kid does this, my kid does this. And you're like, comparing notes, and you've found a kindred spirit. You immediately connect with that parent because, I'm up at 3:00 every morning. How about you? You have that connection. My kid doesn't sleep either. Yay! Somebody else who gets why I'm cranky and tired every day at 2:00.
And if the church can be a place, so all those challenges that parents of neurodivergent kids encounter out in the world, not that we're expecting perfection, but if the church can be one of those places where they don't have to worry about that as much, that's a powerful way we can share the good news of the gospel. I don't mean to sound cheesy, but it is. If the church can even lighten that burden even a little bit.
And the kids are picking up on it, because I find a lot more tolerance with other children in our church, even with the spicy kids. They have a little more grace with those kids than some of the adults do. The adults are more, get in line or do your thing, or you're not supposed to be doing that, but the kids they're learning in this day and age to be a more tolerant of kids that are differently abled.
Mm-hmm. So 2 closing questions. One is, well, first of all, is there anything that we haven't covered in the past 45 minutes or so that because I know you took some notes.
I did.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to include?
I don't think so. I haven't really been flipping around, but I really didn't go a lot on my notes. I think, just creating those positive experiences for those kids. Those kids are just, they're important too. And it's easy to be friendly with the normal kids, the neurotypical kids. And my kid has a lot of really tight relationships here in the church with older adults.
I've seen
that.
She
connects better with older people than she does her own peers, her own age. But even before it's kind of come to the forefront, I think we've gotten huge steps in the last year or so. But she made connections with older adults. Tish, Tara Sandercock's mom.
Yeah.
They were sending notes back and forth. Poppy can't write, but she could draw a picture, and her mom would send Poppy a letter, and I would read it, and Poppy became obsessed with mail because that one little thing. The Setzer send Poppy cards, and Emily, but they send her.
That's so
and my kids, Poppy loves it. She loves to get mail, and that's huge. And she's continued that relationship with Tara because of her mom.
Yeah.
She's got that's like another grandparent to her, and which is huge because the more grandparents you have. The more people you have that love you. And then I, as a parent, I love anybody that loves my kid. Anybody that pours into my child has my heart instantly. Donna Barrier, she's another one who gave Poppy the, the big board up front with the bookshelves at the front of the church. She gave Poppy an entire month. Poppy's obsessed with bees. She's a junior beekeeper. And that is her. All autistic kids have a superpower. And my kiddo's superpower happens to be bumblebees. I'm deathly allergic to bees. But we don't want to put...
I didn't know that.
I am. I actually got stung one time and they had to put a tube down my throat. But you don't want to put your fears onto your kids. Sure. So when she was, not even 2 years old, taking walks, and she would pick bees up in her hands, that's her superpower. So she goes beekeeping. But Donna let her have that entire... And she brought all of her bee stuff, and she had the congregation put notes, affirming bee positive notes. She did little cards for everybody to put notes, and our congregation put notes up on the wall. And every Sunday she would come in for 5 weeks because we left it up longer than we needed to because they weren't ready for the next thing. I'm like, it's okay, I can stay up another week. But every single Sunday she would come in to read the notes that our congregation had put on that wall, those positive notes that they had put on that wall.
And I love that because there's so much fear and anxiety in the church right now because we, like most other mainline churches, are getting older, and older. And there's a lot of fear and anxiety about that in the institutional church, and that might be the topic for another podcast. We can hold that in one hand and hold in the other hand what an opportunity that is for congregations such as ours that have the majority of our congregants are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. What an opportunity that is to make meaningful relationships with our younger families, and that those, we can. And I just find that to be very poignant.
Yeah.
That some of those relationships just make a huge difference in both the life of the children and their parents. And
the person that's showing their interest. If you get to know any kid, if you get to know them, and you pour into those kids, they're going to, now or later, they're going to pour right back into you. But yeah, especially when you hit these kids that are neurodivergent, out in the real world, outside of the church, they don't get a lot of positive interactions. Like for my kid especially, she gets more positivity in the church. She has more connections in the church than she does outside of the church. Because, she doesn't, her best friend at school is her teacher.
Yeah.
So she doesn't sit and have lunch with anybody else. And she doesn't, interact with a lot of her peers outside of the church. But when she comes in here, her peers are the adults in the church mostly. She has, the Taras and the Donnas and the Phyllis and she has all these people that are genuinely excited to see her and they want to say hello. And most of these people do it on her terms. They know her well enough to know to do it on her terms. So two kind of closing questions. One, you had mentioned that, as a parent of neurodivergent children, there are certain obstacles in navigating the world that are unique in the parenting, being a parent. So my second last question is on self-care. As a parent, I've been a parent now for 4.5 years, and I've realized that self-care is important for everybody. But as a parent, we can't care for our kids unless we care for ourselves. Right. And that's easier said than done. Yeah. I'm fully aware of that. What is there a self-care practice that's kind of keeping you grounded these days? That's giving you the resiliency that you need to do the work that you're called to do. What's something you do? So I'm also ADD. But you would have never guessed that. Never would have guessed. So what, as an ADD person, what we typically do is we dive into a project and then we're like all in. So my saving grace per se right now is I'm a sourdough bread maker, and that's been like, it's repetition, just like my kid with autistic people. They crave that repetition. Did you learn how to do that during COVID like everybody else? No. My daughter gifted me sourdough starter, but it's just the act of making bread. We probably have like 50 loaves in the freezer. Nice. But just making the bread is so, like, I don't have to look at a recipe. It's all in my head. I can do it again and again. It's, and I can add to it. I do inclusions. And so that's that's what I do to kind of self-care right now is I can go, it takes 2 days to make a loaf of bread. So it's a routine, and it's, and I know that I have to attend to it. So it's something that kind of grounds me a little bit, where I know, if nothing else, I know my bread is going to need me to feed it. So now a somewhat related question. Jen Hatmaker is a popular podcaster and Christian author, and at the end of her podcast, she asks each guest a question that actually I think originally came from Barbara Brown Taylor, and that's a very simple question. What is saving you today? It can be something as small as a cup of coffee that's waking you up, or something as big as God's grace. It can be literally anything. So I want to close our time today with that. What is saving you
today?
What is saving me today? I light up for all of my children, but I'm gonna have to say, like knowing I can go home to. I have a little puppy, a little weenie dog named Birdie, and like if you, it sounds so silly, but there is nothing like a dog that just pours in, just loves you for you, and like she
unconditional love in its purest form.
Knowing I'm gonna go home and somebody's gonna be like overjoyed for me to walk in the door, and I need to come snuggle. She likes to get under my neck and just snuggle and just hold me, Mom. So, I could probably say a million different things are saving me today, but
was Bernie at the pet blessing?
Birdie?
Birdie.
No,
Birdie?
We brought the bunny. We brought Lola.
Bunnies,
Yeah,
right.
we have a lot of animals. We have a lot of animals. But Birdie, my little miniature dachshund, is like the animal love of my life. She is just like, she has my whole heart.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sometimes she hit, and I've had a lot of animals over my life, but this one is just, she's special.
Well, Kay, thank you so much for this conversation that has taught me a lot.
Yeah.
And I trust that it will be very insightful for those who are listening. And if you're watching or you're listening, let's have this be the beginning of the conversation, not the end. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Is a correct statement to say that if any of our listeners have any questions, that you would be
happy to sit down. And we all, parents of neurodivergent kids, ask the questions. Ask us. We're ready to just. And if you're open about your child's diagnosis, obviously, if you have a child that doesn't know they're autistic or doesn't know what their condition is, parents not going to be comfortable talking. But ask the questions. Ask, how can my kid interact with your kid? Or, if you don't know, ask, because that makes a difference,
Well, thank you so much for being here in this inaugural episode of what we are tentatively calling the Neighborhood Podcast.
Yes, I love it.
I'm not wedded to that, so if we come up with a more clever name, I'm certainly open to it. But thank you for the listeners, and we will catch you next time on the Neighborhood Podcast. So from all of us here at Guilford Park Presbyterian Church, be well, do good works, and keep in touch.
Thanks.
Bye, y'all.